Hello everyone, this is Chris, aka The Dark Wall, and as many of you may know, I'm a huge Souls fan, and anything Souls related, really. So when I saw one of my favorite studios, Team Ninja, was taking their sip of the Estus flavored Kool-Aid, I had to try the alpha demo they were putting out. Now keep in mind this game is in the alpha stages, and while I will draw comparisons, overall my goal is to assess the game for what it is, not for what it is like. That being said, let's get started into seeing if Nioh is a good enough game to warrant the hype generated by the game it takes its inspiration from. Starting with graphics and presentation. You start the game hopping out of a boat at night, and my first impression is it looked like a DLC pack for The Witcher with the main character's design. The moonlit rundown villages actually do look pretty nice, and while not amazing in terms of graphics, the game is no slouch either. I'm a sucker for good scenery in a game, and the moonlit villages contrasted by the amber torchlight struck a visually pleasing chord that lent atmosphere to the game. A sense of quiet destruction was the general ambience I got throughout the demo. Also worth noting, the stages aren't just for show, they're very multidimensional, allowing for shortcuts opening up, and multiple approaches to fortified positions. Human enemies all blend together, pretty much rundown villagers and trained samurai. Monsters are all pretty much the same for the few ones that were in the demo. It's worth noting that they do, however, animate very well, from villagers moving like frantic untrained swordsmen to the samurai being very skilled and refined. The monsters also have a lot of personality, as well as how they move around, as well, either portraying like a sense of power or maybe just like odd depravity to them. In general, the game seems very well animated. Story-wise, it's about as involved as you'd expect to see from something in the Souls genre. Granted, nothing with a subtle storytelling element would lend itself to an alpha demo, so in all reality, we'll have to wait and see on that matter. Because for now, the story seems to be that I got out of a boat and beat the shit out of a bunch of samurais and zombies, so yeah. Now to the meat of the game, the gameplay. Right off the bat, as with most Souls-esque games, I need to stress that it is not a carbon copy of a Souls game. It does some things better and some things worse, so let's analyze it overall. Mechanically speaking, a lot has changed. Defending your backside is a massive priority now. Anyone being hit on the back, enemies or yourself, will take massively more damage than a regular strike. If even a weaker villager lands a hit on your back, it can often one-shot you, which I do feel is a bit excessive. This damage enhancement is also true for if your stamina gets depleted. Enemies now have their own stamina bars as well, meaning if they get tired out, they're open to critical attacks. Think ripostes from Dark Souls. They also can't really move for a bit either. The same goes for you though, you can get stunned if you run out of stamina, so be careful on that. This adds a tactical meter management angle to the game. There's supposed to be a co-op mode, however I didn't find it by the time the demo ran out. Unfortunately, I had other things I was working on at the time. From what I hear, matchmaking is random, although who's to say how it'll be in the final release. No. Weapons have a lot of depth to their moveset now. You get 3 stances per weapon. The heavy obviously emphasizes power at the cost of speed and evasion. Medium does decent damage without overly committing, and also is the stance that includes most weapons parrying techniques. Light is more about wearing your opponent down through small shots while evading. One thing I really like is that each stance has its own dodge. Heavy has a slower roll, medium has a decent dash, and light has a very quick dash that can be changed into another dash easily. Because of this, each stance has a specific role to play. Heavy is your damage dealer, the stance you use when your opponent isn't very good at defending and doesn't really have anyone helping him out. Medium is the stance you use when you're sort of trying to carefully poke and find an opening and just deal decent damage. Light is the careful stance. This is a stance you use when you're facing a stronger opponent or maybe facing multiple opponents and have to be careful. That's one thing that's a big side note though. Enemies cover each other very well in this game. 2 enemies are a decent challenge, 3 even more so, and 4 requires constant evasion and finesse to pull out the win. Enemies definitely work well as a team in this game, which is a welcome change from the earlier Souls installments. In general, for that matter, enemies do feel a bit more thoughtful, which I really liked. Weapon styles also have unlockable samurai arts, which are essentially special moves. They all seem really cool from what was available in the demo, allowing you to get a knockdown, maybe a grab or a strong attack. Weapon fighting styles also go into a great degree of depth. As opposed to Dark Souls, which you have a very limited set of tools that you use for very specific situations. This one, it feels like you have a ton of tools at your disposal and you're doing grandiose combos and flourishes everywhere. So it's a little bit more eccentric in terms of the actual combos that you're going to be doing. Which is a good thing, because besides your chosen weapon, you don't get to have much else in terms of active equipment. You only hold one thing at a time. Granted, you can switch out between two weapons, but gone is the dual-handed approach synonymous with the Soul style. While the game can do its own thing, this feels like a choice that limits player creativity and strategy. Using a shield in your offhand or maybe a secondary weapon that added to your offense was one of the creative aspects of a Souls game, and I was sad to see that it was gone. Also, in terms of creativity, while movesets have a lot of depth, there are not a lot of movesets in and of themselves. In the alpha there were 3, the sword, the spear, and the hammer. Granted, it is an alpha, but I do feel concerned that every sword played the same. This essentially reduces weapons within a class to feeling like stat choices instead of distinct weapons with their own personalities. On the topic of stats, let's also mention the menus. The text is extremely small, and even on my 47-inch TV, I had to squint to read a lot of it. This is especially bad since a lot of the story and tutorials are told through these little soul echo things that you find on the ground. They have Japanese words with English subtitles over them, but it's often too hard to read the subtitles, meaning that you may miss core mechanics, like how it took me several hours of play to realize that they tucked samurai arts into the main menu instead of the bonfire menu, which everything else leveling oriented is tucked into. Another thing I wasn't too fond of was the disposable nature of your equipment. I don't know if in the alpha they just wanted everyone to keep things moving between different items and weapons and stuff, but as it stands, enemies drop weapons like candy, but it all breaks within 1 or 2 runs through an area. This means if you find a sword or armor piece that you like, you're going to have to replace it after a while. You can repair it, but it's a consumable item you have to use up, and it's very limited. This furthers the feeling that you're equipping stats, not gear. It also clutters up your menu with useless gear that the same menu takes very long to drop per item. Magic abilities seem fairly reined in, being relegated to the item slots and not significantly different than any other item. They weren't terrible, but from what I got, they weren't too impressive either. My biggest gripe, however, is the nature of the lock-on system, in the sense that it's garbage. All it does is focus the camera on your enemy. Why is this a bad thing, you may ask? Well, there are a lot of reasons why. First off, if you do an attack, it won't be aimed at your enemy by default. Hell, even if you position yourself facing your enemy, many moves will still miss, which will leave you vulnerable, and sometimes dead due to the game's punishing mechanic. It also means it'll leave your back open a lot if you try to backstep. This essentially kills a lot of strategic spacing options, because if your enemy hits you at the wrong angle, instead of strafing or backstepping, your entire body is turned at that angle. This feels like a terrible design choice to me, because it takes a lot of the finesse out of your movement that the dodge system put into it. So yes, lock-on needs to lock on. Alright, so let's take a step back though. Nioh at this point is a very pretty game, but not really industry defining in terms of graphics. It sets itself apart from the Souls series by having a great level of depth to its movesets comparatively. It also has smarter enemies and more challenging group fights. However, while having a very distinct and likable style to it, it also lacks the level of polish one would expect from a Souls game, with mediocre lock-ons, forgettable equipment, and an overall poor user interface. Still, all of these things are minor irritations and not game-breaking issues. The game shows that it is in the alpha stages, but there is a great degree of promise in Nioh, a Japanese-themed Souls game that is courageous enough to depart from many of its predecessors' norms. Anyways, I thank everyone for stopping by for more videos like this, as well as regular live streams, including Nioh when it comes out. Do subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share. Anyways, I thank everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!